Hello, it's Andrew here yet again, and today we are at episode 189, and we're quietly working our way through Matthew chapter 26. We are now coming to the end, in Matthew's account anyway, of the Last Supper. And what we'll notice is actually Matthew's account of the whole of the Last Supper is very short. Very short. It's all over within, about 10 verses. It's very short. So, we pick it up at Matthew chapter 26, verse 26. While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." Then he took a cup, and after giving thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. For this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will never drink again of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom." When they'd sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. So this is it, the centre of worship for much of the Christian church worldwide. Liturgical churches almost cannot gather for worship without gathering around this sacrament, around this ceremony, the simplest of meals. I wondered what it seemed like to the disciples when they heard these words from Jesus. I wonder how they interpreted it. I wonder what they thought of this. It was all, to us it would seem very peculiar. Imagine hearing it for the first time. "Take, eat, this is my body. Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant." What would we have made of it? As I said, this is central to a large part of the Christian church, perhaps the largest part overall. I was on retreat a few years ago in Melbourne at a Jesuit retreat house. It was their headquarters, Campion in Kew in Melbourne. I've been there a number of times. Very, very good. Thoroughly blessed by being there. And on the last trip, as I say, it was some years back, Lynn came over to join me, and we checked into a hotel in the centre of the city afterwards for just a couple of days of wind down. And on a Sunday morning, we were lying in bed, and we turned the TV on, and there was church on TV church, and it was a Catholic service. It was contemporary, and in every sense you'd think it was just like any other service, but they had to have the Mass, the liturgy of the Eucharist, the communion, the breaking of bread, whatever you call it, had to be there. Otherwise you got a sense of this wasn't a proper Catholic worship event. It's central to a good number of traditions. And it's worth noting that as we read it here in Matthew's Gospel, that while it's recorded in all three synoptics, in Matthew, Mark and Luke, it is missing from John's Gospel, the one with the most extensive description of what happened this evening. The fourth Gospel has everything, including the foot washing, 3 chapters of Jesus' most profound teaching and prayer, and yet excludes that which has become the foundational act for much of the Christian church. I find it interesting. It's interesting. As I say, John's Gospel is chapters relating to this Last Supper, but this communion, this breaking of bread, this Mass, this Eucharist does not appear. And I'm sure that there's a reason. I'm sure that there is, and I've heard some explanations, and I'm not going to go into it today, but I find it interesting. It's interesting. The tragedy of it is that which was intended to be life-giving has, down through the history of the church, been a source of such contention. Many have died in wars fought over it, literally, or been alienated from one another as a result. people who will not fellowship together because they have a different understanding of what this means. Hey. And my understanding of the contention, and I could have it wrong, but I don't think. I think it's basically comes down to whether or not we are to understand that Jesus' reference to bread and wine becoming body and blood are to be taken literally. When we eat, are we actually eating the flesh of Christ? And when we drink, are we actually drinking his blood? Or is it all symbolic? Is it all figures of speech that are pointing to something, images? The Salvation Army, which sprang out of the Methodist Church, of which I'm a part, celebrate neither baptism nor the Lord's Supper. And the explanation I heard being that William Booth, the founder of the Salvation Army, stated that there were no sacraments of the church that had caused so much division, so much strife, so much contention than baptism and the Lord's Supper, that they would have neither of them. And they don't. And I think they're the poorer for it. I was part of a group for a good number of years before I became the bit that was between that and becoming part of the Methodist Church. I'd probably look back and say it was a cult that practiced neither of these two sacraments either. As I said, I too was the poorer for it. I want us to make some observations though, and that is that before being embraced by the Methodist tradition, and that's what happened, they embraced me. I'd been a bit of an ecclesiastical gypsy. I'd worshipped in a number of different Christian traditions, which practice the sacrament, this one in particular, in different ways. And I've come through that with a kind of sadness, but also amusement, that there are those who take their way of doing it as the only God-ordained way that the sacrament can or should be celebrated. Because what I've discovered is they all work. It doesn't matter what way you use, they all work. The issue is not the form, it's the heart. It's the presence of God meeting us in the sacrament, however and whenever it happens to be celebrated, by whomever, with what elements, either alcoholic or grape juice, whether in one chalice or in small individual glasses, whether by an ordained priest or by a brother or sister who takes on the task, whether sitting in our pews or going to the front and kneeling at the rail or standing before the priest, whether part of a long liturgy or following a short prayer simply offered, whether in a cathedral or in a living room or around a campfire. Wherever, whenever, by whomever, with whatever we eat and drink. This is one of those thin places where our world and God's kingdom come very clear and come very near and almost touch, and you can sense God. It's where God meets hungry hearts and thirsty spirits, where God offers forgiveness, offers cleansing, offers healing, offers renewal, offers a fresh start, and it can happen within the context of a simple liturgy, that as we open ourselves and engage together, God becomes present. I love that John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, although I don't believe he ever had intention of starting a church, but that's what happened, that John Wesley made sure that the communion table was an open one. No membership cards are required. No commitment to a particular creed. Just simply coming in our need. And that's one of the things that I've loved about Methodism. It's an open table to whomsoever would come. Wesley believed that communion was a converting ordinance, that people could and did come to faith as they participated in it. I agree. I've seen it myself. I remember one particular Christmas Eve service, midnight communion that we ran as people, and they were randoms. You could just think of just a couple of them in particular who I've never seen before and will never see again, kneeling at the rail with tears rolling down their cheeks as they take the little piece of bread and drink from the little cup and recognize that God in some way is profoundly at work in the heart of the soul. Something is happening, something is moving, something is shifting, something is changing. Because you see, it's not about the form, it's about what God is doing as He meets people who are hungry and thirsty. And it's been my own experience also. The truth is that I don't get to receive communion in the way that congregants do very often, because I've been the dispenser of it for the last 30 plus years. But I've also experienced it to be a place of healing and renewal when I found my own life falling apart around me. I remember one significant occasion for me when I was at St. John's Trinity Theological College in Auckland. And the college would gather on Wednesdays in the morning for our weekly worship and communion service. It was combined Anglican Methodist. And this particular day I was in a bad space. I didn't even know that I could get there. I felt like my life was falling apart and I was falling to bits. It's just a very unpleasant experience, but I dragged myself along. And I sat there, I endured it, but there were good bits. There was Mary Cagle, Reverend Mary Cagle. I didn't realise till years later that she was only fairly new in ministry herself. She was the preacher. And she spoke on compassion. I still remember that after all these years. And she referenced Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her work with the dying. And all of that was all part of it. But was when I stood before her as she handed me the bread and she looked me straight in the eye and she said, "Andrew," because she knew who I was, she said, "Andrew, the body of Christ given for you." And in that moment, everything changed for me. There was healing, there was renewal, there was a sense of all the fears, the anxieties just falling away, all the broken bits just reintegrating and being put back together. And I was able to walk out of that hall, the Wesley Hall at St. John's College, a new man, and face the week that's ahead. And I think that's at the heart of it. That's at the heart of this. It's not about the form, it's about the sense of encounter. That when we go along hungry, when we go along in our need, that God can meet us in that place. To me, it's the heart of communion. And that's why we call it such, because that's exactly what it is. It's a communion, heart to heart, God and us. It's an opportunity for encounter, for meeting with God, that we might go from it with healing, with clarity, with greater purpose. God bless you.